Today's lecture in Anatomy and Physiology is on the endocrine system. The outline of this lecture is as follows. We will talk about the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. We will talk about the thyroid and parathyroid. We will talk about the adrenal glands. We will talk about the pancreas. And we will talk about all sorts of miscellaneous little things that deserve maybe a line or two for discussion. Definitions of endocrine versus exocrine. Endocrine means that the hormones are released directly into the bloodstream without ducts. Exocrine means that the hormones are secreted into a duct. So for example, the exocrine pancreas, they produce chemicals that are released into ducts, such as digestive enzymes. The endocrine pancreas produces hormones like insulin, which are secreted directly into the bloodstream. Here's an overview of the endocrine system, and there are quite a few organs that are involved. This includes organs such as thyroid, parathyroid, pineal gland, pituitary gland, hypothalamus, adrenal gland, ovaries, testis, pancreas, to name a few. By the way, that picture that I just showed you, you can feel free to pause the presentation and use it as reference. Now let's talk about the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. The hypothalamus functions to release various hormones to stimulate the pituitary to secrete more hormones. The hormones that are secreted by the hypothalamus are named releasing hormones. Let's take, for example, GnRH. So GnRH is a releasing hormone, and it stands for gonadotropin releasing hormone, and it stimulates the pituitary gland to release luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone. And the hypothalamus, as you can see here, is located above the pituitary. The pituitary sits in the sphenoid bone, and it is composed of the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. And each of those areas secrete a specific set of hormones. Now let's delve into the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland has both an anterior portion and a posterior portion. Let's start with the posterior portion. The posterior pituitary gland, the hormones are actually produced in the hypothalamus. So the hormones are produced up here. They're produced up here, but they're released down here. So hormones such as antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, otherwise known as, antidiuretic hormone is otherwise known as vasopressin. Oxytocin is oxytocin. But those two hormones are released from the posterior pituitary, but they're actually produced in the hypothalamus. Oxytocin acts on the mammary glands to stimulate the breast to squeeze out breast milk. It acts on the uterus to stimulate uterine contractions, especially during pregnancy. Antidiuretic hormone acts on the kidneys in order to reabsorb water and prevent diuresis, which is why it's called antidiuretic hormone. The anterior pituitary also releases its own set of hormones. The hormones are produced and released in the pituitary. So we have growth hormone, which promotes muscle growth as well as elongation of long bones. We have our thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, which stimulates the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormones. We have luteinizing hormone and FSH, which act on the reproductive organs. We have We have prolactin, which stimulates milk production, as opposed to oxytocin, which does not stimulate milk production, but when the milk is produced, it stimulates the breast to contract and squeeze out the milk. You have ACTH, which stimulates the adrenal gland to release its own set of hormones. ACTH is adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now let's talk about the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is a butterfly-shaped gland, which is located in the neck, and it sits below the thyroid cartilage, which is known as an Adam's apple in men, and in front of the trachea. Its blood supply is from the superior thyroid artery and the inferior thyroid artery. Superior thyroid coming off the carotid artery, and the inferior thyroid artery coming off the thyrocervical trunk, which comes off the subclavian artery. And the thyroid gland produces thyroid hormone, which is T3 and T4, and it also produces calcitonin from the parafollicular C cells. So, like I just mentioned, the thyroid gland produces thyroid hormone, and thyroid hormones are produced in the thyroid follicle. So this follicle produces thyroid hormone. And thyroid hormone is responsible for regulating metabolism, heart rate, growth development. In grown children, it's critical for growth and brain development. And as a matter of fact, children with neonatal hypothyroidism, who are hypothyroid from birth, develop what's known as cretinism, where they have growth retardation and intellectual disability. And you have calcitonin, which is produced by the parafollicular C cells, and its purpose is to reduce serum calcium. Just think calcitonin, bone in, calcium goes back into the bones, so lower serum calcium. That's one way to remember it. Now let's look at the parathyroid glands. The parathyroid glands are intimately related to the thyroid gland. They're located on the back of the thyroid. They get their blood supply from the inferior thyroid artery, and they produce parathyroid hormone, which increases serum calcium. And it increases serum calcium in a number of ways. It increases calcium resorption of bone by stimulating osteoclasts to break down bone. So the osteoclasts, think they clash and break up stuff. So when it breaks down the bone, calcium is absorbed into the bloodstream. Osteoblasts, on the other hand, build bone. They increase gastrointestinal absorption of calcium. So it increases calcium absorption from the gut. It decreases excretion of calcium from the kidney. It also increases vitamin D, affected GI absorption of calcium. Let's move on to the adrenal gland. So adrenal literally means on top of the kidney. And its blood supply, it has an arterial blood supply, which is segmental in nature. It has the superior, middle, and inferior adrenal arteries, which come off the phrenic artery, directly off the aorta, and off the renal artery, respectively. It has venous drainage on the right. The venous drainage of the adrenal is directly into the inferior vena cava, while on the left it drains into the renal vein. And I misspelled vein. Kind of funny. All right. So regions, from superficial to deep. You have the adrenal cortex and you have the adrenal medulla. The adrenal cortex itself has 3 layers. It has the glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. And the regions of the adrenal are important because you can tell what hormone is secreted by the region of the adrenal gland. So the adrenal cortex produces different hormones depending on the zone. Just remember GFR and salt, sugar, sex. So zona glomerulosa, the G and the salt here produces mineralocorticoids such as aldosterone. And one of the things aldosterone does is it has an effect on water and salt absorption in the kidney. It reabsorbs water and salt. Zona fasciculata, that's the sugar part. It produces glucocorticoids such as cortisone, which in a stressed state increases your blood sugar, your blood glucose. Zona reticularis, sex, produces sex hormones such as androgens. And just in case this isn't enough, I also provided some nice pictures to help you remember as well. The adrenal medulla, which is the innermost part of the adrenal, produces catecholamines such as epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine, also known as noradrenaline. And just in case you couldn't get enough of adrenal hormones, I've enclosed this chart so that you know where these hormones are produced and what they do. And I'm going to let you read this for yourselves. Now let's look at the pancreas. We'll just talk about the exocrine pancreas and get it out of the way. So the exocrine pancreas consists of pancreatic acini, which secrete digestive enzymes such as amylase, which breaks down sugars, proteases, which break down proteins, and nucleases, which break down nucleic acids from food. The endocrine pancreas contains the pancreatic islets, which is represented here. And different cells in the islets secrete different hormones. The alpha cells, for example, secrete glucagon. Okay, and glucagon, what glucagon does is that it raises your blood sugar. It acts directly opposite to insulin. Beta cells produce insulin. And what insulin does is that it lowers your blood sugar. And in diabetics don't produce enough insulin, so that's why they have high blood sugar and get the complications related to chronic elevated blood glucose. Delta cells secrete somatostatin. Somatostatin is known as a GI brake. It inhibits all GI secretions and it inhibits all it inhibits all GI hormonal release. So somatostatin doesn't stimulate anything. As a matter of fact, if you have a test question about somatostatin and one of the choices is that it stimulates something, that's not the answer. F cells secrete pancreatic polypeptide. Move on to miscellaneous. Kind of like an honorable mention. The pineal gland, which is this little dot in the brain, secretes melatonin, which is responsible for the sleep-wake cycle. The testicles produce testosterone. Ovaries produce estrogen. The end. It's over. Thank you for listening. Like this video. Subscribe.